welcome. What can I get for you?
How many kids do you have? I've got
Bit somebody, and I gotta talk about it. Oh, that's so good to
The
hear.
population of London, Ontario is
Oh, I'm
about
sorry, I wanted to
383,800.
You started about 6 months ago. Like you've lost a lot.
Hey, I love what you did.
But today, we're going to hit the pause button for a second. Because I believe, and you hear this from me oftentimes, that God is for you. In fact, I believe that wholeheartedly, this idea that God is for you. And today, what I want to do in our time remaining is I want to fill in this blank. I want to fill in this blank with what are the implications around a good God, a God that is never going to let you down, a God that is there for you. What are the implications that come when it really resonates deep within your heart that God is for you? Now, to do that, I want to share a little story. So, for those of you that don't know, Alden and I, my wife and I, she was up here singing. She's incredible. I'm just kind of her trophy husband, and it works out great. Just being honest, right? So it works out great. But when we got married, let's be honest. I mean, every brand new couple, they have their 5-year plan, their 10-year plan, and sometimes we disguise it. Well, this is where we want to be career-wise, where we want to be financially. But most young couples, when they articulate that my 5-year plan, it is their family planning, right? So it is it's code for this is when we want to have kids, and this is how many kids we have. And let's be honest, young couples, whenever they set out their 5-year, 10-year, 15-year plan, it never goes as planned, right? You laugh at them as I'm sure parents watching the kids go through this family planning. You're like, oh yeah, sure, 5-year plan. We'll watch this. It might be 1 year, and it's like, oh, what do I do with this? Or maybe it's not 1 year. Maybe it's 6 or 7 or 8, and it's like, what do I do with this? Well, that was our story. And so we waited and waited and waited, and we finally got Stephen. Life was incredible. And so what do you do when you have a little baby? Well, for me, I said, babe, I want to quit my job, and I want to start something brand new. That doesn't always sit well, right? I mean, we already have a young baby, and so why would one want to completely uproot themselves? And, it makes it more difficult to feed babies when you're jobless, right? But it was fascinating because Alden and I, we had this conversation, and we really felt compelled that this was our next step. Even though we've got a little one in tow, that this was the step, this was the path. I mean, as we began to process it and to pray about it and to really ask God, we've got, through the course of life, our faith has wavered back and forth, but this was one of those moments where we said, you know what? It is crystal clear. We've got to take this step. And you know what happened? We got a positive pregnancy test right after that. It wasn't one. Let me rephrase that. We didn't just have one baby. We had a baby, right? I'm not saying we had twins because like, whoa, no. We didn't just have this 6-month-old. We all of a sudden are getting ready to quit my job. We've begun telling people we're fixing to get rid of our job, right? And we're going to start something brand new. And all of a sudden the next announcement was, and we're pregnant. And then the next question to me was, are you crazy, right? Like, what are you thinking? You've got a baby, and you've got a baby on the way, and you're going to quit your job? I'll never forget, Alden and I had a conversation. We were talking about, okay, so what do we do with this? I mean, we're early enough in the stage that we could legitimately hit time out. Let's just retract. Let's unfriend the people we've already friended. Let's retract it and just pretend we've never said anything, right? I'll never forget, she looked at me and she said, Scott, baby number 2 will either be a red flag or he'll be an excuse. And I don't want him to be an excuse for the rest of our lives. This is what was communicated. And this is what I've held on to since that moment as we're sitting in that August 20. I mean, you got a little baby that's crawling around like, we can't even walk on his own. And let's quit our job. But here's what I want you to know and what I believe passionately is this, is God is for you, so be bold. If God is really for you, it changes the way you live. It changes the way you process life. It changes the gauge. It changes the perspective of life because you begin to look at life from a whole new perspective, that this is a God that is for you, that is never going to let you down, a God that is going to be with you even in difficult times. I'll never forget, we looked at each other in those moments, and it was this idea that God is for us. So let's be bold. And my prayer today is this, is as we unpack, what does it look like for you? What does it look like for me? What does it look like for collectively us to live this out? My prayer is this, is that through the course of today, that you would collectively, that there would be a resolve inside your heart that because of the fact that there is a big God, a good God that loves you and is with you and is for you, that you would begin to ask more boldly. That you would begin to seek more boldly, and that you would begin to knock more boldly. Here's what I love about you, is you make me a better leader. You probably don't even realize that, but you make me a better leader because I understand that we are in the midst of some of the smartest, most incredible people in our area. We're in the midst of some of the greatest leaders in your organization, some entrepreneurs. We're in the midst of some very, very smart people. And so it's a challenge for me because the good news is I try to be the smartest guy in the room, but I know I can never do that. And what I love about you is there is constantly something that you're looking at. There's this future idea for many of us when we look at our 10-year plan, right? We all have this collective 10-year plan. We've got this future vision of what we want, this collective idea of if I could draw up a 5-10, if I could draw up the perfect me down the road, this is what it would look like. For many of you, you've heard us talk about the big five. I mean, when it comes to your relationships, when it comes to your family, when it comes to your job, to your finances, when it comes to your church, we encourage you to take on this idea of what do I want it to look like in 5 years and in 10 years? And to be intentional around that road to say, okay, if this is where I want to be, what is the wise thing to do? In light of my past experiences, current circumstances, and future hopes and dreams, in light of what I want it to look like, what is that next step? But I mean, that's all good and all, right? Let's live in the realm of hope. Let's daydream. Let's pretend. This is all good and all, but the reality is we have a current reality. You begin to look at, oh, great, I'm supposed to retire in how many years? A 401 what? Like, is that even, like, it's not happening. We begin to look at this idea of family planning, or we begin to look at this idea of how do I begin to set my family up to succeed? How do I begin to set my kids up for college? How do I begin to set X, Y, and Z? We look at this future vision, but the problem is we look at our current reality, we look at our bank account, we look at me, and we begin to say there is a big gap. Yeah, this is all good and well, but how do I take my current reality and turn it into my future vision? How do I take what I'm drowning in at times and turn it into this beautiful picture of what could be? And what I would contend to you is I think our mission, our challenge is how do we shrink this gap? Because I do believe that God is a good God and God is for you. And I don't think God is surprised by your current reality. And I do think that God wants you to be intentional and wants you taking steps. So what do we do about this? I think the best way for us to bridge this gap, it's what I'm going to call a bold ask. It is asking boldly. It is seeking God boldly. It is knocking on the door boldly. And the reason I think this is a valuable piece, it's not because of something creative that I came up. It actually comes from Jesus, from the writings of one of the documents that spent Matthew, who spent his entire life trying to document this individual, this Jesus guy that turned his life upside down. Matthew was a tax collector. Tax collectors in that day and age, they were shunned upon, they were spit upon. You don't invite tax collectors to your friends or to your parties. If you invite them to your parties, your friends are going to just skedaddle. Yet Jesus looks at this tax collector. He looks at Matthew and he says, "You're worth it. Come, follow me." All of a sudden, this tax collector, the lowest individual on the totem pole, the individual that was perceived as being just straight scum, this Jesus guy looked at him and said, I see value in you, and I want you to follow after me. And he did. And Matthew documents the life of Jesus, and there's a few other individuals that were following Jesus or investigated the claims of Jesus, and they wrote different documents. But we're going to stick in Matthew because Matthew does an incredible job of documenting one of Jesus' most famous sermons. At one point, Jesus is sitting on a mountain, and he's got just thralls of individuals that are following him. And one of the things Matthew notes in the story is that the people that were listening to Jesus, they heard him as an individual who had great authority. So these people, they're sitting on a mountain. I mean, I'm sure it was probably hot. Think Texas in July. I'm imagining. And yet they're still just like leaning in saying, oh, tell me more. What in the world? This is completely overwhelming. In the midst of this message, Jesus, he makes this statement. He says, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be open to you. Now, isn't that a cool invitation? I mean, isn't that nice of Jesus to say, hey, here's the deal. When you're talking about your future hopes and dreams, you're talking about what you want your future to look like, here's an invitation for you. Just ask, seek, knock. Ask more boldly, seek more boldly, knock more boldly. But that's hard. For me, as a student pastor, before we started North Tarrant Church, I'd have so many students that would come to me and they would have these audacious prayers, right? I mean, students, they want to save the world. They don't just want to save their world. They don't just want to save their school. They've got these dreams of, oh yeah, I'm invincible and we're changing this world, dang it, come on. And there was a side of me that was very excited. Man, applaud it. You are awesome. But there was a side of me that kind of wanted to protect God. I don't want you to pray such a big prayer because what if God doesn't come through? Why don't we focus, let's don't pray so big because what if, I fear that if he doesn't answer your prayer the way you want, that you'll be disillusioned, that you'll be disappointed. And I really don't want you to have that picture of Jesus. So let's make it really small. Let's don't be so bold in our prayers because heaven forbid you not get what you ask for and then think less of God. And yet that's probably where many of you, that's where I have found myself. We pray these bold prayers and we expect God, and then what happens is there's nothing in return, and we begin to get disillusioned and disappointed. But it's as if Jesus could have stopped there. He continues on. He goes, for everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be opened. Okay, wait a second, Jesus, stop. Why couldn't you have just stopped at verse 7? Why did you have to continue forward? Because now you're saying that there's almost a promise. There's this idea that if you ask, you will receive. He who seeks finds. He who knocks, the door will be opened. Let me just ask you a question, because I at times get challenged by these verses. I, at times, want to try to articulate what Jesus is trying to mean in these, but if we're going to be honest, let me ask you a question that kind of challenges us when we read this. Have you ever experienced the death of a dream? I mean, really, have you ever experienced the death? Have you ever had this idea that this is what I want this is what I want to do, this is where I want to go, I really feel that this is that next step, and then all of a sudden you hit that hurdle, you hit that hiccup, and you begin to question, well, was God really there? You begin to question, was it just something in the Kool-Aid I drank that morning? Like, what was going on? Let me ask it a different way. Have you ever asked for something and not received it? Have you ever sought for something? You didn't find it? Or how about this? Have you ever knocked and the door wasn't opened? I wish I could sit here and say, it's okay. But the truth is, for many of us, we are together in this. So what do we do with this? How do we handle that? How do we really take steps forward? How can I, with credibility, say, keep praying and keep asking and keep seeking and keep knocking, keep praying, keep asking, keep seeking, keep knocking? Because at the end of the day, with some of the things we've asked of God, we tend to think that maybe Jesus was just over-promising. And now he's under-delivering. Maybe I shouldn't have been so bold. Can I really ask that question? Can I really ask that question of Jesus? Like, was he just over-promising? Like, I feel even bad asking that. But Jesus then goes on and says, hey, I'm not done. You ready for this? Listen up. He says this, which of you, if his son, he takes it to the family unit, he says, hey, I've got you, you're listening. Now let me take it, let me drill it in a little bit more. If his son asks for bread, we'll give him a stone. Or if he asks for a fish, we'll give him a snake. Now, we know that that's not what we would do. And he knows that. So he goes on, he says, if you then, though you are evil, and I know he wasn't talking to you, all right? Like, he was talking to his audience that was probably filled with tax collectors. He says, if you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask? So we as pastors, we look at these passages and we try to figure out, how do we protect God? How do we protect Jesus in this? Because we've asked some pretty heavy things, and he says that if we ask, the door will be open. We will receive. We knock, the door will be open. We seek, and we will find. So oftentimes, we as pastors, we play this faith card, right? We say, if only you had enough faith, it would come true. If only you had enough faith, you would have gotten what you asked. Because we're trying to figure out a way that we can protect God, right? We're trying to figure out a way, how can we protect Jesus' credibility? How do we protect his credibility? If he says, if you ask, you will receive, you will seek, you will find, knock and the door will be open. What do we do with this? Can I tell you, I don't think this is a faith thing. When Jesus is saying these elements, when Jesus is pushing this prayer, when Jesus is saying, if you want, all you've got to do is ask, to seek, and to knock. Jesus is leaning more on the obedience side than he is on the faith side. Because I was at a funeral yesterday of a 38-year-old woman who died of cancer. 38. I got to visit her hospital room multiple times. I got to visit her bedside just last week. And can I tell you? I left encouraged. If there was anybody who had more faith, it was, I did not have near the faith she or her family had, and yet they said goodbye. I had a conversation with an individual who lost his wife, and now he's got 2 kids, and he's trying to wrestle with life. And one of his big questions right now is, if God is such a good God, why did this happen? I thought we had enough faith. What could we have done differently? And yet, we as pastors, we push this. We say, hey, if you will pray, if you'll ask in faith, God will grant it. And hear me out. I want you to know, faith, putting your confidence in God, it is so critical. But John the Baptist had incredible faith. There are individuals throughout the course of Scripture, of individuals who had great faith, and they saw dreams come to a devastating halt. So I think our responsibility is this, and I think what Jesus is pushing us towards is more of understanding our role, that Jesus is saying this is an obedience thing. This isn't a faith thing. I want you to have faith. I want you to know that I am the Son of God. I want you to know that when times are tough, you can put confidence in me that I will be good. I will be there. I will hold you up. But it is not as much about the end result as it is about the journey that we're on. And to which Jesus says, your responsibility is to ask, to seek, to knock. And he says, my responsibility, God's responsibility is this giving. It's giving, it's seek, you will find. It's knock and the door will be open. My responsibility is the giving and the seeking, or the giving and the finding and the opening of the door. That God's responsibility is the answer. My responsibility is the ask. And too many times I get that mixed up. I try to push God's cards. I try to say, hey, God, this is what I want in my timing, and this is what I want. This is how I want it to look. And so, God, here's the deal. I'm going to pray super, super bold prayers. I'm going to ask you to do super, super awesome things. And so think about what could happen if you just followed my advice, right? And God's like, wait a second. Your responsibility is not the answer. Scott, your responsibility is the ask. Your responsibility is just to keep asking, to keep seeking, and keep knocking. And remember that my responsibility, God's responsibility, is the answer. I'm sure Jesus looks at me oftentimes and is like, hey, silly, come here. Let me be me. You just do you. You be Scott, and let me be me. Let me do what only I can do. I am God, and trust me, I know what I'm doing. Let me be me, and let you just do you. So what do we do with this? How do we really handle this? How do we really make sense of this idea? Because I imagine there's many of us in here, we've experienced the death of a dream. We've had these ideas, these thoughts, we've had these dreams that we wish could happen. And now we're sitting here scratching our heads saying, what's next? Well, Pete Scazzaro, he's a fascinating author. He does a lot of writing when it comes to the emotional healthy church, the emotional healthy spirituality. I mean, he deals a lot with the emotional health, which I think is so valuable this day and age. I think it's such a valuable concept to really try to lean into and to push and to remind people that, hey, God is for you, God is with you. Let's work on our emotional health, because so many times, and we talked about it all last month, that there's this breathing room issue that we don't have much of a gap, right? Pete Scazzaro says this, that in talking about dreams and talking about our life and talking about where we are, I think there's great ideas. I think there's great implications here. He says this, that at the beginning of any idea, at the beginning of any life concept, there's this birth, right? You had a dream. You decided, you sat down and you made out, this is my 5-year plan. This is my 10-year plan. This is what I want it to look like. And inevitably, when we begin to play out our birth, when we begin to play out our dreams, we begin to play out our future hopes and dreams, inevitably something's going to happen. There's going to be a hiccup. There's going to be a hurdle. There's going to be an uh-oh. That we all of a sudden begin to process what happens. God, I thought you called me to this. God, I thought you were with me. God, I thought that this was our game plan, and then all of a sudden they leave me. I thought this was my game plan, and then all of a sudden I got this notice. I got this job departure. I got this struggle. I got this hurdle. I got this pay cut. We begin to process and we say, okay, well, I had this dream, but all of a sudden death hit me. What do I do with this? How do I make sense of this hurdle? How do I go forward with this? And all of a sudden we look at life and we look at ourselves in the mirror, and many times we look at this death as if this is the end. We look at death as if, well, I guess I've got to figure something else out. And what Pete Scazzaro says is, guess what? This is only step 2. This isn't the finality. This isn't the game over. This isn't the conclusion of the book. Rather, he says, pretty much in every dream, and many of us have seen this, pretty much in every reality, and many of us have seen that, there is a hiccup, there is a hurdle, and there is something in the mirror that stops us, that tells us you should not go any further. And isn't it true, many of us, me included, we listen to that voice that says, oh, well, it's over. But yet it's in those moments that Jesus is saying, ask more boldly, seek more boldly, knock more boldly. Because I've seen time and time again that after the death, there's the resurrection of the dream. There's the resurrection of the idea. There's this idea. We had this dream. We had the 5-year plan. We never thought it would look like this. And oh my goodness, it is so much better. There's this resurrection of the dream, of the birth, of the idea. I never thought I would enjoy this career, but I'm glad that I got cut from this career, because I never would have made it here if I wouldn't have gotten there. All of a sudden, we're asking more boldly, we're seeking more boldly, we're knocking more boldly, and what happens is that perseverance in the midst of the death leads us to a resurrection. It leads us to this idea, leads us to a dream that is better than we can ever imagine, which leads us to the 4th step, which is the ascension. When we begin to ask more boldly, and we begin to seek more boldly, And we begin to knock more boldly. The beautiful thing is it's in those moments that God tends to take control, that God tends to lead, that God tends to step out in front. And we begin to see, oh my goodness, this dream is bigger and better than we could ever imagine. So several years ago, I don't know, 10 years ago, I got the opportunity. I was a student pastor. All of a sudden, a church up in Wise County calls me and says, hey, we would like you to be a student pastor. And just so you know, I did not do small town Texas. I thought East Fort Worth was my MO. Like I thought, give me a hat backwards, maybe sag my pants a little bit. Let's talk about Jesus. Let's roll with it. And we all of a sudden get moved up to Wise County where, you starch your pants. I thought starches were potatoes. Who would have thought? But all of a sudden, through the course of that conversation, we were blown away that God would ever send us to Wise County, which we loved it. Don't get me wrong. It's beautiful. We moved up to Paradise, had a great time. But it was in that moment, it was in that transition that God introduced me to probably one of my best friends today. And his name is Doyle. He was the guy up here that was doing the vision moment a few moments ago that was talking about Mark's baptism story. And you know what happened over the next several years is Doyle and I, we would have conversations at breakfast. We'd have conversations over lunch. We would go into somebody's living room. Sometimes we would just go into our offices and say, hey, what if? Right? We would dream and we would just be brainstorming. And wouldn't this be incredible? Wouldn't this be awesome? If you and I, if we could start our own church one day, what could be? Meanwhile, while Doyle and I are sitting there having these conversations, there's a group of adults in Fort Worth that had begun that process, that had created a church. We're having an incredible time. We're leading and having fun in this model, creating a church similar to North Point, creating a church that genuinely leads people into a growing relationships, is concerned about steps and intentionality, and really wants to create a space where unchurched people can walk in and feel comfortable and feel like, wow, you were expecting me? And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, these individuals that were in this church, the door got shut. They had a birth. They had this idea that maybe one day we could create a church just like North Point here in Fort Worth. And then next thing you know, unfortunately, that dream was shut. Meanwhile, Doyle and I are dreaming of what could be, what could be, what could be. And there was a group of about 20 adults that continued in the midst of this death, knocking more boldly, asking more boldly, seeking more boldly, begging God, say, God, I know this dream isn't over. You've got this fire in my heart for a reason and a purpose. I know that you're up to something and it doesn't look good right now, but the good news is the resurrection is coming. They continued to dream big. They continued to knock boldly. They continued to seek boldly. They continued to ask boldly. And the next thing you know, Doyle and myself intersect this incredible group of 20 adults, and we said, what if? And they said, here we go again. And next thing you know, Alden and I are sitting on our couch, expecting number 2. And we looked at each other and we said, is this an excuse or is this a red flag? Because deep down inside, I've been dreaming of one day planting a church and one day seeing God do incredible things. And the next thing you know, how do we do this? Look at you guys. I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, because this is not just a dream. But what happens when we collectively in our community begin to ask more boldly, begin to seek more boldly, begin to knock more boldly? What happens in our community when you and I, when we begin to look through that lens of, God, could you overwhelm me? God, I believe you're good. I believe you're big. I believe you are for me. And because you're for me, God, I'm going to ask you to be bold in the midst of my asking. So what happens? Can I tell you something? Several years ago, 2 years ago to be exact, we're sitting there about this time as a church meeting at the Heritage HOA facility. We're having fun, enjoying life, dreaming of what could be. And all of a sudden, God opened up the doors. He opened up an opportunity. There was a window of opportunity that we basically said, we can't afford to make that move, but we can't afford not to. You know what happened? We asked more boldly. We sought God more boldly, and we knocked more boldly. And God continued to come through. And this past couple months ago, our leadership team, our stewardship team, our steering team, we got together and we said, we're at a crossroads again. Betty Perot has been an incredible facility for us. We've loved it. But what if? We've got a window of opportunity. What if we hit the gas? What if we ask more boldly? What if we seek more boldly? What if we knock more boldly? What would happen if we collectively were to do this together? I didn't get into this to be comfortable. I didn't get into this just to create a cool church that we can kind of come to and we can pat ourselves on the back. We got into this to make a big difference. Here's what I want to ask you. You know, over the next several months, for us to make this move, like I said, I don't think we can afford to make this move, but I don't think we can afford not to make this move. If you're a first-time guest, if you're here for the first time, I just want you to know, my challenge for you is this. Ask, seek, knock. Ask, seek, knock, and believe that God is for you, that He is good, and He wants you to be obedient in being bold. But if North Tarrant Church has made a difference in your life, I want you to know, over the next few months, we're taking a bold step, a significant step. A step that is going to cost us around $34,000 to make it happen. And I'll tell you this, we can do it. But here's the cool thing. Just in the last couple of months, in the process of just dreaming about this, you know what? God's already almost provided half of that $34,000 because we asked more boldly, we sought more boldly, and we knocked more boldly. But here's my challenge. And I'm not going to call you, I'm not going to beg you, but I want you to know, as an organization, we are taking a bold step that will involve full engagement and full sacrifice. So I want to ask you, would you be willing to help? Would you be willing to help us make a big difference? In the last 6 weeks, we've baptized 8 incredible people. There's more to come. There are so many more to come, not just the people we haven't met yet, but in this room right here, I know of several that we're processing their stories with. It is a beautiful thing. So here's my question. Would you be willing to help? Would you be willing to help us make a big difference in our area? We can't do this without you. We can't. We haven't gotten this far without you. And we need you more than anything to ask more boldly, to seek more boldly, and to knock more boldly. Because God is for you. And God is for you. And God is for you. So where we go, wherever we go, may we be a reminder of such a good God that is for you. God, we love you. And God, I thank you so much for the fact that God, in the midst of hurdles and heartaches, that you are good. And God, I thank you for the fact that you have constantly reminded me over and over that you're a good God. And so, God, I ask that as we go from here, as we process next steps, God, I just pray, Father, if for any first-time guests, that they would just kind of disregard the last few moments if they wish. And that we would all collectively be challenged to go from here asking and seeking and knocking more boldly, knowing that this is not about faith, but it is about obedience, and that you are more concerned about the journey than the end result. So, God, may we have the perseverance to fight. May we have the perseverance to ask more boldly. And God, I just pray God, that collectively that we would be able to see you come through time and time again, that you would do what only you can do, and that is overwhelm. So God, I pray that you would continue an incredible work in North Tarrant Church. It is in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen.